Life's title, a peculiar thing, sometimes bestowed upon us without consent, and sometimes it unfolds as such, leaving us powerless in its wake. Helplessness lurks, mocking from afar, as life's unpredictability sets ablaze even our shoes. Yet, solace may be found in the sun's embrace, bare feet dancing in its comforting rays. Some claim that killing a loved one casts them into shadows, but I argue if they are truly yours, why would they harm you? He lay conscious on the ground, but his body hurt too much to move. It seemed as if life had drained out of him in an instant, only to be replaced by a dark blue substance that flowed into every pore of his skin as he lay there. The blood became invisible, even though his veins stood out across his arms, legs, neck, face, chest, and forehead. They had merely been blobs of red fluid. His entire body lost all color. The last thing he saw before passing out was his wife standing over him with a look of hatred in her eyes. As his vision faded, he heard the sound of footsteps approaching. When they stopped, there was only silence for a couple of seconds before they started talking. He could still hear them but was unable to understand anything they said because he could not comprehend their language. He could also feel everything happening around him, like when you put your hand in the air while walking down the street. When contact was made, something would come out of your hand to your palm. If you tried to hold your hands together, it was similar but a bit different. It felt like nothing. He could only hear the people but could not make sense of what they said, so all he could do was hope they would leave. But he already knew they would not go. His whole body seemed to be frozen in this state, and the sensation of cold air hitting his skin made him more uncomfortable than ever before. He hoped that it would not happen again. His entire body tingled as if his cells were not functioning properly. All the pain in his body seemed to be completely absorbed by the blue liquid that covered him from head to toe. He felt his body starting to lose feeling in his limbs and fingers. Everything around him seemed to turn darker, and his heartbeat accelerated slightly. Gradually, the sounds of voices faded further away, and he felt himself slipping into unconsciousness again. With half-opened eyes, he looked at the phantom compass one last time, whose needle did not point north. Instead, it swiveled and quivered before his body felt nothing anymore. This time he passed out as if he were a puppet with his strings cut. He could not remember much other than waking up and the sensation of his skin being pricked by the sharp, freezing wind coming through a hole in the ceiling of the room, but it was enough to scare him. The feeling of being trapped alive inside his own body. The feeling that he was dying. No matter how hard he tried to fight it, it always seemed impossible. He turned his head and looked around. He was still locked up in the cell, and the police were chatting casually like a bunch of friends having a cup of coffee after school. At least that was his thought. The light above him was blocked by heavy metal bars, and he had never seen anything like it before, but he was sure that was where he was. He had nothing to do with them, so he turned around and faced the wall when he heard someone enter the police station. Footsteps, shuffles. He listened intently. Selamat pagi. Good morning. Adakah Tan Sri Datang? Has Tan Sri come? Tidak. No. Ini ialah teh pagi anda. Here is your morning tea. Biscuit saya. My cookies. Ya saya bawa air. Yes, I brought it. Are you going to eat as well? I imagined you must have been quite hungry, Alex called to him from behind, but he did not move. His eyes remained fixed on the wall until he heard some rustling sound. The noise came closer, the footsteps halted, and Alex leaned against the bars with a packet of biscuits in his hand. His black orbs stared at the back of the criminal. His wrinkled orange uniform was almost transparent under the fluorescent lights. Alex felt uneasy. The man's presence unsettled him so much that it made him nervous. His heart began racing rapidly and he did not know why. Here, take this. We don't often show kindness to anyone. John stood beside Alex, holding a cup of tea. The warmth spreading through his hands felt nice. It'll help with the cold, he said with a sarcastic laugh, shaking his head. Both of them were responsible for the prison's security. The sound of boisterous laughter echoed throughout the room in the police station. There was nothing particularly unusual about the sound since they always laughed like this. But it was a little too loud for his liking. The laughter did not seem friendly either. It sounded like an angry mob ready to tear someone apart. It made him think of something bad. A lot of things, actually. He shook his head and cleared his mind. He did not answer, just lay down with his eyes closed and listened to everyone's conversation. They talked about something, but he could not focus on what it was. Maybe he should get some rest. He could always pretend he had and just leave, no matter how interesting it sounded. What are you doing? David reminded them. He is our senior, so give him some respect. Senior? And respect? Huh. John sighed in frustration and took a sip of tea. Alex noticed that John drank too quickly, making the hot beverage run down his chin. He chuckled and wiped it off gently with the edge of his sleeve. John glared at him, trying to convey his annoyance without opening his mouth. Then he turned his gaze to David, and his smile softened a bit. David sat up straight and rubbed his forehead. He felt tired, but that was probably because all those years sitting at a desk had made his bones stiff. "We were policemen. If we started respecting the criminals, then the crimes would increase," Alex asserted. "And here he killed his wife and buried her in a place where not only the police but even the dog could not reach." He raised his voice slightly so everyone could hear him clearly. Everyone seemed to shut up. They started to discuss among themselves. John wondered what kind of crime had driven this man to kill his wife and bury her secretly. What kind of man could do that? How many innocent people had he ended up murdering with his hand? The man lying inside the prison gritted his teeth and clenched his fists but did not answer them. He wanted to say something but could not. Every part of his body hurt, but he just lay there hoping the numbness would disappear. With great effort, he lifted his hand to reach for the water bottle on the floor. His fingers reached it first, but it fell to the ground. As he struggled to lift it and drink, everyone kept staring at him silently. Their attention seemed to be focused solely on him, but he could not stop trembling like a leaf. After struggling for a few minutes to bring the water to his lips, he finally succeeded. He drank slowly because of all the muscles he could no longer control. "What is happening here?" A voice came and everyone turned to look at the door. The officer had been standing outside the police station, but now he entered the room. All the men who had been watching the criminal inside the prison immediately backed away from him and walked toward their tables. John hid the cup of tea and Alex put the packet of cookies in his pocket. David quickly buttoned his uniform and took his chair. They saluted him at once. Alex and John were already standing at attention, waiting for his orders. The officer looked at them coldly. Alex sensed a strong hostility radiating from the officer. Something told him to stand his ground, not to be intimidated, to prove to everyone who was wrong and who was right. "Sir," David implored, looking him straight into his eyes. His expression was filled with fear. "You asked us to check if the convict had died during interrogation? So is that true? Did you find him dead?" The officer asked sternly. David nodded. "Do you know what killed him?" "We found a stab wound to the neck." "And that's the only injury you found?" The officer raised one eyebrow skeptically. "Yes, sir." He glanced at Alex and looked at John. "Bring this man to my cabin," he ordered him and walked toward his cabin. "Yes, sir," they both answered and started walking toward the prison's direction with their heads low. They felt the tension emitting from their superiors, and it only worsened. David opened the prison door and brought the man out in handcuffs. Coming out, he threw an angry look at Alex and John, who were still standing at attention. Alex lowered his gaze. That was another reason why they hated working at the police station. They were treated like prisoners. It had never bothered them at first. Now, however, it did. He was scared of losing his job. He feared he would fail his probation and be forced to leave this place and return home. The man said nothing and went to the cabin. "Even today, you will not get into the habit of knocking on the door before entering," the officer said to the man who entered his cabin without permission. He quietly fixed his hair with his handcuffed hands and sat in the chair. The officer sat down as well, facing him. Silence filled the space between them, but it was not uncomfortable at all. They shared a common sense. He knew he was no match for that man, and the latter knew he would not be able to escape if he wanted to. He looked at his uniform and read his name. Arne Stephen, Deputy Commissioner of Police, Investigations and AMP, Intelligence. He had 3 stars on his shoulder, 2 badges and a medal on his chest. On one side was a star badge and a Guard of Honor badge. On the other side was the Panglima Mangku Negara medal, which was why juniors used to call him Tan Sri. He smiled and shook his head in amusement, thinking about the old days. Arns took one look at his behavior. He frowned and narrowed his eyes as if contemplating whether or not to speak. He took off his police cap, set it aside and started looking at him. After 2 minutes of silence, the man began to talk. "Did you bring me here to gaze at me with love? If that's the case, know that you could simply lock me in a cell, and even there, I'd still be lost in your eyes. You have been in jail for a month, but you still haven't changed." Arns smiled softly. "If you keep behaving that way, then maybe you're not as smart as you look. You're the one who keeps on saying that I'm stupid. Why is that?" He snorted mockingly. Arns ignored the insult and continued. "It's been a month and still Raya? If you're just going to keep repeating the same old things, I'm done listening. I swear, not even a gnat is bothering my ear right now." He began to walk away, but Arns stopped him. "Rex, listen to me first. There's a case. I knew you'd say something like that. You haven't even invited me for tea, Rex teased him sarcastically, pretending to be annoyed. The corners of his lips curved upwards when he heard the faint laugh coming from Arns, who seemed quite happy. Arns promptly picked up the phone and dialed the number. 2 cups of tea quickly. In my cabin, he ordered and hung up the phone. Rex let out a soft chuckle. You can go whenever you want when the time comes, Arns replied calmly. But I need you to solve this case. This murderer has gone insane. He has murdered his family in a place not far from here. It was bizarre that the dead bodies of 7 people were recovered from one house. It sounds suicidal, but actually it is not true, right? Rex interrupted him immediately. Yes. Arns replied while nodding his head. So what can I do? You are in the police. Look, you have a Guard of Honor badge too, Rex said, pointing to the badge on his chest. Arns unknowingly fixed his badge but said nothing. He looked up again and noticed the small smirk on Rex's face. He did not mind being ridiculed by Rex, but he hated when others laughed at him instead. Arns cleared his throat. I know your record. You are one of the top detectives in the country. I have seen your reports countless times, so you